I'm Ron Howard. I'm the director of Hillbilly Elegy, Real Events. It's a memoir by J.D. Vance. It's the journey of a young, interesting, intelligent guy who loves his family and his family loves him, but the particulars of the family create some baggage.
Ron Howard has directed Hollywood legends, won Oscars, and shaped some of the most beloved films of all time. But there's one movie he now looks back on with disappointment. And it's not just because of the backlash. It's because of her. A woman whose performance drew headlines, but whose real-life connection to the story may have led to something Howard never expected. What started as a passion project spiraled into controversy, regret, and a political storm he never saw coming. For Ron Howard, Hillbilly Elegy wasn't just another project. It was a chance to tell a story that felt urgent, emotional, and real. He wasn't chasing blockbuster numbers or box office buzz. He was chasing truth. The film, based on the memoir by J.D. Vance, followed a young man torn between the chaos of his upbringing and the promise of a better future. It was a story about addiction, broken families, and the complicated loyalty that often ties people to their past. Howard saw it as a universal narrative, one that could speak to anyone who had ever struggled to escape their circumstances. From the beginning, he approached it with care. He wanted to do justice to the pain and perseverance woven into Vance's life. He brought in big names: Amy Adams, Glenn Close, actors known for disappearing into roles and carrying entire films on their shoulders. Everything about the production signaled that this would be prestige cinema, an emotionally raw character study that would challenge audiences to look beyond stereotypes. But what Ron Howard didn't anticipate was how tightly the story's meaning would become tangled in the real-world politics surrounding it. At the time of filming, J.D. Vance wasn't a household name in the political world. He was just an author with a compelling story. The movie wasn't supposed to make a statement. It was supposed to make people feel something. But the moment the trailer dropped, the internet had other ideas. Critics were split. Some praised the performances. Others accused the film of glorifying poverty porn and simplifying deeply rooted issues. It became clear that no matter how honest the intentions were, the film had stepped directly into a cultural minefield. And for Howard, what began as a deeply personal drama was turning into something he could no longer control. And right at the center of it all was her, an actress whose portrayal would be both praised and blamed, and whose connection to the controversy would later make Howard question everything. But things were just getting started. To bring this raw story to life, Ron Howard didn't cut corners. He aimed high. And the casting proved it. Glenn Close signed on to play Mama, the tough, no-nonsense grandmother who kept the family from completely unraveling. Then came Amy Adams as Bev Vance, J.D.'s mother, a woman battling her own demons while trying, and often failing, to be there for her son. It was a bold move. Amy Adams was known for disappearing into emotionally complex roles, and this one was no different. As Bev, she was erratic, manipulative, sometimes heartbreaking, and sometimes hard to watch. But that was the point. The character was never meant to be likable. She was meant to feel real. Howard believed Adams could carry the emotional weight of the story. But that decision came with risks. Her portrayal didn't just ask viewers to empathize, it demanded they step into the discomfort of addiction, volatility, and deeply flawed motherhood. For some, that performance was unforgettable. For others, it crossed a line. Still, at the time of casting, everything looked perfect on paper. Oscar nominees, personal storytelling, and a director known for pulling the best out of actors. What could go wrong? But the response was nothing Howard saw coming. When Hillbilly Elegy finally hit Netflix in 2020, It didn't land with the prestige or praise its creators expected. Instead, it exploded into controversy. Critics tore it apart. Some accused the film of reducing generational poverty into a checklist of cliches. Others called it emotionally manipulative or politically charged, even though Howard insisted politics had nothing to do with it. But the backlash didn't just target the film, it aimed squarely at the people behind it. Amy Adams, in particular, drew polarizing reactions. Some viewers praised her raw, fearless performance as one of her best. Others slammed it as over-the-top or even exploitative. Social media lit up with debates about whether the film was an authentic portrayal of working-class America, or just a sanitized version made for elite audiences. And underneath the surface, a new conversation started to bubble. Was the film accidentally paving the way for something much darker? Because at the center of it all was J.D. Vance, and his story was far from over. And what happened next would change how Howard saw everything. In the months after the film's release, J.D. Vance's name started appearing in a very different spotlight, this time on the political stage. The once relatively unknown author of a personal memoir was suddenly speaking at rallies, criticizing so-called elites, and aligning himself with the most divisive figures in American politics. His rhetoric became louder, sharper, and more extreme. The man whose story Ron Howard thought was about survival and self-discovery was now calling for culture wars and feeding into outrage headlines. To Howard, this was like watching a character in your film suddenly step out of the screen and rewrite his own ending. And it wasn't just a political turn, it was a complete transformation of public perception. The same movie that was meant to be apolitical, personal, and human was now being used by pundits as evidence of a broader narrative about rural America, one that didn't align with Howard's values at all. Worse, it wasn't just J.D. Vance's new politics that raised eyebrows, it was how people began interpreting the film through that lens. Critics who had previously disliked the movie now tied it directly to Vance's political identity. Some even accused the film of being propaganda in hindsight. Ron Howard had tried to tell one man's story, but that man had changed, and in doing so, he changed the meaning of the film itself. And Howard? He wasn't just confused, he was disappointed. Ron Howard isn't known for controversy. In fact, he's one of Hollywood's most respected and consistent filmmakers, someone who usually lets the work speak for itself. But after J.D. Vance's political rise, Howard couldn't stay silent. In interviews, his tone was careful but clear. He was very surprised and deeply disappointed by the direction Vance had taken. He admitted that, during production, Vance's political beliefs never came up. The focus had been entirely on the family, the addiction, the resilience, not on ideology. Now, Howard said, he'd watched someone turn their life story into a political weapon. And in the process, the film he'd worked so hard to humanize had been dragged into a narrative he never intended to tell. He didn't say he regretted making the movie outright, but the message was between the lines. If he had known where Vance's journey would lead, would he have still made the film? Would he have still cast Amy Adams in such a volatile role? Would he have tied his name to a story that no longer felt neutral? Howard never gave a definitive answer. But in Hollywood, sometimes silence is the answer. And behind the scenes, one performance still lingered in that regret. Amy Adams is no stranger to emotionally intense roles, but her performance in Hillbilly Elegy was something different and divisive. As Bev Vance, she played a mother spiraling through addiction, rage, and desperation, and she did it with an intensity that left no room for comfort. One moment, she was vulnerable. The next, violent. It was a performance meant to disturb, But that's where the trouble started. Some critics called it transformative, another example of Adams pushing boundaries. Others called it a caricature. Online, her scenes became memes, punchlines, and examples of Oscar bait gone wrong. Her emotional outbursts, once intended to be raw and real, were mocked for being too theatrical, too big, too loud. But behind all the noise was a more complicated truth. Adams had fully trusted Howard's direction. She'd taken the leap into a risky, unflinching portrayal of a woman unraveling. And in return, the film's backlash hit her hard. Even though she didn't write the script or shape the message, she became one of its most visible lightning rods. And as the film's reputation crumbled, her performance, once seen as a brave risk, started to feel like collateral damage. Some speculated that Howard, knowing how it had all turned out, might now see that casting decision differently. Not because of her talent, but because of how much the public misunderstood what she gave to the role. And that brings us to the part no one really talks about. Ron Howard has never publicly blamed Amy Adams, or any actor, for the controversy surrounding Hillbilly Elegy. But the weight of the film's fallout, the critical backlash, the cultural debates, the political firestorm, can't be ignored. And when you look at Howard's interviews, there's a subtle pattern. He talks around the film more carefully now. He sidesteps questions. He focuses on the process, not the result. In Hollywood, that kind of distance usually means one thing: regret. Not necessarily regret about telling the story, but about how it was told, who told it, and how it landed. The performance that was supposed to anchor the film ended up being one of the reasons it became so polarizing. Not because of Adams herself, but because the role, intense, messy, volatile, became impossible to separate from the film's larger baggage. And Howard, who had once believed in the story's emotional core, seemed to realize too late that audiences no longer saw it the way he did. It was no longer a story about a boy and his mother. It had become a statement he never meant to make. With a performance people were no longer willing to understand. But the final twist? That regret may have more to do with himself than anyone else. Ron Howard didn't set out to make a political film. He didn't expect Hillbilly Elegy to spark outrage, or to watch one of his most emotionally ambitious projects become a cultural battleground. And he certainly didn't expect that the performance he believed in most would become one of the most criticized of Amy Adams's career. But that's the risk with true stories. Once they're out in the world, you can't control where they go, or who they become. For Howard, Hillbilly Elegy may not be a movie he wishes he could erase. But it's clearly a movie he no longer stands behind in the same way. Not because of bad intentions, not even because of Amy Adams, but because the story he thought he was telling turned out to be something else entirely. And sometimes, that quiet disappointment, the kind no one says out loud, is louder than any headline.